Hi again, everyone. So this session is all about mental health and emotion regulation in ADHD. Just to begin with, just a sensitivity warning or a bit of a trigger warning to let you know that I will be talking very briefly later on in the slides about self-harm. Unfortunately, this is something that comes up a lot for young people and young people with ADHD, so it's just something to briefly mention. There will be a trigger warning just before the slide that I talk about it, so just so that you're aware. To begin with, as always, just something to kind of get you involved, get you thinking. So, how common are mental health difficulties with children and in children and adolescents with ADHD? And this is in comparison to kind of neurotypical children. So, anxiety disorders. How common in terms of a percentage do you think this is in young people with ADHD? So this is up to 45% of young people with ADHD might come across some kind of anxiety, and this is compared to around 30% of neurotypical children and adolescents. So of course it's that bit higher, and as I've said in previous sessions about that difficulty kind of navigating the neurotypical world and finding the demand of day-to-day life that bit harder. So unfortunately it is that little bit higher. What about depression in terms of a percentage? So again, this is up to 45%, I suppose, often because if someone is very anxious, then they're likely to be low in mood as well. So it's a similar sort of percentage. And this is in comparison to around 20% of neurotypical children and adolescents. So again, it's that bit higher in those with ADHD. What about sleep disorders? I spoke about this in the previous session. How common are sleep disorders in those with ADHD versus neurotypicals? So this is about 25 to 70%. So it's a big range, but it's thought that up to 70% of young people will have some, with ADHD, will have some kind of difficulty with sleeping at some stage. This is compared to around 40% of neurotypical children and adolescents. So it is still a very common issue, I suppose. 40% is still very high, but again, it's more difficult in those with ADHD because of all the differences with kind of, like I said, the demands of life, but also the physiological differences as well, the differences in the hormones and the neurotransmitters. And what about tics? How common are tics in ADHD? So 20%. So 1 in 5 people with ADHD will also have tics. And this is about the same as neurotypical children and adolescents. So it's thought that about 50% of children who have tics or Tourette's will also have ADHD. So if your child's presenting with tics, then it's likely that they might also have ADHD as well. And finally, what about substance misuse? How many more times likely is a child with ADHD to misuse substances than a neurotypical child? So about 1.5 times more likely than a neurotypical child or adolescent to abuse substances. This might be for lots of reasons. So we might think about kind of that impulsive decision making that we see in ADHD, or the difficulty kind of socially and being with people who might be doing it as well, wanting to fit in, that kind of thing. But also a really, really strong one that we see is that side of kind of self-medicating and trying to manage the difficult side of ADHD and with substances. So things that might help to kind of slow their thoughts down a little bit or help them to feel more in control or calmer, those kinds of things. So unfortunately, it's that little bit more common in those with ADHD versus neurotypical people. It's really important to note, though, that in terms of all of these things, although it seems that mental health difficulties are more common in those with ADHD, and like I said, this is because of the demands of life and because of some of those differences kind of physically. It doesn't have to be an inherent part of ADHD. It doesn't have to be part and parcel of ADHD. So it's really important to be aware that if your child is struggling with a mental health difficulty, that there is kind of help and support out there, and it isn't something that they just have to struggle through with. So to begin with, I'll be talking to you about emotion regulation. So thinking about meltdowns and shutdowns, which might be something that you've come across with your young person before, in terms of that emotion regulation, when things become far too much and there's a meltdown, or they just kind of withdraw, shut themselves away, and that would look like a shutdown. So in terms of, well, both meltdowns and shutdowns, it's important to kind of think about that iceberg analogy, in that the meltdown or the shutdown is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the bit we can see, but we need to understand what might be underlying that as well. So the things that might drive a meltdown or a shutdown, and I'm sure there's lots and lots of different things. Some of the most common things can be things like sensory overload or overstimulation, so feeling like there's too much input around, not being able to kind of zone out or tune out other things that are going on. It's just all too much and it's overwhelming, and that can cause a meltdown or a shutdown. Anxiety, of course, as we know, this is really common within ADHD. That sense of kind of effort versus motivation as well. So we know that in ADHD, it takes that bit more effort for someone to do something that they don't really feel all that motivated to do. That's because of those dopamine levels, because of that ability to be able to get started on tasks, to sustain focus. So sometimes if someone's being asked to do something where the demand kind of outweighs the effort that they have to do that thing, that of course could lead to a meltdown or a shutdown. Rejection sensitivity as well is a really common one that comes up, and that we kind of see parents, or we hear parents talking about quite often, is that their child who has ADHD will have this sense of kind of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or just kind of it feels very sensitive to other people's reactions. This can be really common in ADHD. I suppose some of the reasons for this might be because of trying to navigate things socially, because of what I talked about in the first session in terms of that sense of self, that self-esteem, kind of being the sort of person they want to be, in line with who they want to be in friendships at school, those kinds of things. And it can be really, really difficult to be holding that in mind and to be navigating that all the time. So rejection sensitivity can, of course, lead to emotional dysregulation. And perceived unfairness as well is another one that's really common in ADHD. So kind of this sense of how things should be and how they would like things to play out, and that doesn't always happen. So that can be a real sticking point and then lead to meltdown and shutdown. And of course, there's probably so many more reasons and so many more individual things that will contribute to a meltdown and a shutdown. So it's really important, I suppose, to understand what underlies this iceberg, what is causing and contributing to the meltdown and the shutdown. And it's really important to explore this a bit more and to understand this a bit more, like I said, uniquely and individually for your child, so that you can kind of tailor what you do to help that meltdown or that shutdown in terms of being able to resolve it or to avoid it. So the first step to do this is actually, prior to this, is emotion recognition. So helping someone to get a sense of what it is that's going in their body. So recognizing the emotions that are showing up for them, rather than kind of not noticing those and just reacting to those very, very quickly, rather than kind of recognizing them, knowing what that might mean, responding to them in a way that's kind of thoughtful, or that would help to avoid kind of a meltdown or a shutdown. So there's several tools to help build this skill of emotion recognition. So in ADHD, as it can be more difficult for them to recognize those kind of internal cues or things that are going on. So there's skills and tools and things that can be used to help promote this. The first and one of the most simple things is just like a feelings wheel. Sometimes I will bring this out in therapy sessions to help a person to sort of see all the different emotions that they might be feeling, to help label, to put a name to what it is they're feeling, to help build up that ability to talk about what it is that they're feeling without trying to sort of feel in the dark, to figure out what that is. So feelings wheels can be really helpful to start to notice, name and recognize emotions. Other things might look like feelings thermometers. So, you know, how are you feeling today? And they kind of might rate themselves on a thermometer. Or I used to work with a young lady who had a feelings thermometer on her bedroom door, and she had like a Velcro thing that she would then move into how she felt that day, or whether she would move it kind of hour by hour depending on how she felt. And it was just kind of a signal to other people to let them know how she was feeling, as well as a chance for her to check in and think, how am I feeling today, and how am I going to communicate this to others? Things like body maps as well. So these are really helpful in thinking about where someone feels certain emotions in their body and what they might feel when they're feeling those things, so they can help with that recognition. You know, when I start to feel that my hands are shaking or my heart is beating faster, maybe that's because I'm feeling anxious or angry, and starting to help label those emotions. Ratings as well, using faces or colours, sort of scales can be really useful. Things like Disney's Inside Out characters are quite popular as well, as particularly with the younger children, because they're able to recognise and put kind of a nice character to the emotion that they're feeling. It's less threatening. It's you know, something that everyone's aware of. They're able to talk about. Things like emojis as well can be really helpful. So sometimes teens might want to just send a message to their parent with one or two emojis to let them know how they might be feeling that day. Just to kind of communicate that, again, in like a less threatening way than having to have a face-to-face conversation about how is it that you're feeling, and being quite vulnerable in sharing that. So kind of thinking about emojis, what might match on how I'm feeling, sending those over. But there's lots of different things that might help someone to think about what it is they're feeling. And like I said, it's really important to recognise feelings first, and then we can know how we respond to them, rather than not recognising them and then reacting to them really quickly when they suddenly show up at the surface. Of course, I wanted to put a note in here as a psychologist that it's really important to be aware of and kind of hold this belief and share this belief with your children and your that no emotion is good or bad, it just is. So as humans, of course, having emotions is part of being human, is what makes us human, and no emotion is good or bad. So it's kind of, we have all of these emotions because they're all functional. They always tell us something. So if we're anxious, it's because we're worried about something's going to happen, we want to protect ourselves, therefore we're kind of thinking ahead, how can we problem solve that? And of course, anxiety can then get to the point where it might take someone too far the other way, so they start being more anxious than they need to. But of course, that emotion at the core of it is functional. Same as things like excited, it tells us something good's going to happen, we get ready for that, we prepare for it, those kind of things. So they're all functional. No emotion is good or bad, and when we start labeling emotions as good or bad, we start struggling more so with the bad ones, or the ones we perceive as bad. So if we kind of hold this belief that emotions just are, you know, they're just part of it, and it's just something that we work with as humans, it makes the emotion less sticky when it shows up. So if we feel like, if your child feels anxious, they're better able to kind of go, okay, this is showing up for this reason, I can deal with it and kind of move forward or move on with it, rather than feeling like I'm anxious and I don't want to feel this and I've got to get rid of it, and kind of getting more and more caught up with it. So holding that belief and sharing that belief can be really helpful and powerful in itself. So thinking about emotion regulation, so what to do, what different tools or techniques might there be? And I wanted to talk first of all just about the Solihull approach, which you might have come across as parents and carers before. So this is something, it's kind of a model for thinking about how parents kind of approach the relationship with their children, the interaction with their children, and it's a model kind of to support the emotional health and well-being. It's a bit of a tool to understand behaviour in your child. So I thought it would be helpful to touch on this, and I've included some links on the next slide which might go into further detail about the Solihull approach if you're interested in it. So the Solihull approach is based on these kind of three parts, this triangle you can see. So the first part of this is this containment part of the model, and this is all about processing, helping your child to process those feelings. So a bit like the emotion recognition I've just been talking about. So it helps the child to notice, name, recognize what feelings they're feeling, and to kind of, for you to contain that for them. So it's all about kind of communicating feelings, understanding them, making sure that you're doing that for yourself and your child. So you might notice, name and recognize and label the feelings that you're feeling to your child in order to sort of model that they can do that too. And it's kind of this idea of forming kind of consistent boundaries, making sure that someone feels safe, that they're allowed to feel that the emotions that they're feeling, and those emotions are valid given whatever it is that's going on. So this sense of emotions being contained, again, like I said, they are kind of, they just are. They're okay, they're allowed to be, they're not good, they're not bad. And then there's this part about reciprocity as well. So this is all about enhancing the relationship between you and your child through this kind of mutual understanding of each other. So knowing that you do both have emotions, that emotions are going to fluctuate and change throughout the day, and recognizing together that your emotions will influence each other, so that if your child is feeling something in particular, then that's likely going to influence how you're feeling and vice versa. And knowing that things generally work in the relationship when those emotions are in sync, and actually things when they're not so in sync, it's going to be more challenging. But just recognizing that and kind of preempting that, and knowing that you can repair that when things are not so in sync. Again, that helps someone to feel contained, like emotions are allowed. And then finally, there's this part about behavior management as well. So this is this kind of idea that behavior is kind of like that tip of the iceberg that I showed you. So behavior is a communication of something that's going on, some kind of emotion that's happening, some kind of need, a communication of an emotional need. So it's all about thinking about how we respond to the behavior and how we understand that behavior, rather than seeing behavior as something that's kind of purposeful. A lot of parents will say, rather than the child is giving you a hard time, actually it's that they're having a hard time, and so they're communicating that through whatever behavior it is. So although it might not be a behavior that is particularly desirable or that you like, it's kind of getting to the core of what is going on for them, and that will help them to understand that more so themselves, help them to maybe respond in a different way next time, and to have those open conversations about that as well. So that was a really brief overview on the Solihull approach, but the idea is that the relationship between the parent and the child and the attachment that they've built is kind of the building blocks for positive mental health. So if that's kind of positive, that's in place, if this approach kind of works, then that will support a child's mental health and emotion regulation as well. As I said, here's some links that have some additional information about the Solihull approach and kind of how that relationship and those three different points of the triangle will work. I also wanted to talk about the window of tolerance. This is really important in terms of, it's another model that I use quite often in terms of understanding and thinking about emotion regulation. So we all have a window of tolerance. It's a model for kind of the nervous system activity, for what goes on in our nervous system when we feel certain emotions. So the window is this kind of lines here, and what happens is throughout the day, we kind of, if we're in our window, we're feeling calm, connected, flexible. Certain stressors might come along, things might trigger certain things for us. But if our window of tolerance is kind of wide enough, if we're able to tolerate things, then we can go about our day to day without kind of moving into this hyperstimulation, which is kind of like your meltdowns or your fight or flight, or without moving down into hyperarousal rather, which is more like your freeze or your flop or your shutdowns that you might see. So what might happen is someone with ADHD, their window of tolerance might be much smaller than a neurotypical's, because they are having to deal with much more, so they're more easily and more quickly going to move out of that window of tolerance, either into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Things kind of day to day can change the capacity of the window of tolerance as well. So things like not having had enough sleep, which of course from the previous session we know is a real difficulty in lots of people with ADHD. Things like not having enough food. We all know we're not our best selves when we're hungry and when we're feeling like we're not able to attend to what's going on around us. Our window of tolerance is going to be smaller, but also things like kind of major stressors, things that have gone on, things that are kind of slow burners that are building for us, that's going to make the window of tolerance smaller as well. So for someone who has ADHD, it might be more, their window of tolerance might be smaller, which means that they might be more quick to move out of it into these different states. So as I said, a stressor might come along, they might move into hyperarousal, which means that their heart rate increases, they become very anxious, stressed, there's adrenaline running through their body, and then that's when you kind of see those meltdowns. Or they might move into these hypoarousals, so they might go into shutdown, withdrawal, not wanting to talk to anyone, feeling kind of numb and withdrawn. So as I said, we all have this window of tolerance, but it's a really nice model to use to understand, and something that you might want to share with your child or young person as well anyway. So this can work for young people, it can also work for teenagers. Sometimes it's really nice, and again, it's another way of kind of talking about emotions without having to explicitly have those kind of threatening or vulnerable conversations. So someone might say, I'm moving towards fight or flight or hyperarousal or meltdown. I'm moving out of my window of tolerance, or my window of tolerance is smaller today. Again, it's just a nice model to think about, to be aware of, and to hold in mind when you're thinking about the behaviour part of that soluble approach. Like, what am I seeing here? What might be driving? What might be going on for somebody? So you want to help to identify the triggers as well. So what moves your child in and out of their window of tolerance? And are there regular things? Are there things that are kind of not all that common, but will happen every now and again? Are there things that will definitely move them out of their window of tolerance, and trying to minimise and reduce those as best you can? Here's just another kind of way of presenting the window of tolerance, but this one's in terms of kind of neurodivergent people and the certain things that might move someone in and out of their window of tolerance and what that might look like. So that's just another model, if that's helpful, but there's loads out there for you to see. So what to do if your child moves into that hyperarousal or the meltdown, so they're kind of moving up out of their window of tolerance. So what things might help? Of course, you probably will recognise that time and space works. So we know that when someone moves out of their window of tolerance, this is kind of when the thinking brain shuts down. So you're not so easily able to kind of talk to your child, to rationalise things to them, to kind of calm them down. Actually, sometimes all that they need is that time and space, and that will help to bring them back down into the window of tolerance. Another really key one is breathing exercises, and this is really common now, and people will maybe think, oh, I've heard breathing exercises before, but that's because there is real kind of scientific evidence behind breathing exercises. The kind of physiological way that breathing exercises works is that when someone breathes in, like this box breathing exercise that I've got just in the corner here, if someone controls their breathing rather than breathing kind of as if they might do if they're in that fight or flight response, it helps to send signals and messages to the brain that, we're safe, there's nothing threatening going on right now, we're okay, we don't need to be responding to any kind of danger or whatever it is that kind of the brain is triggering in that moment. And it helps to bring those adrenaline levels down, and it helps to bring someone back into their window of tolerance, engages the thinking brain again, and then you're able to kind of talk through or figure out, or they can respond more easily rather than kind of being caught up in that hyperarousal or that meltdown. So breathing exercises are really important and really helpful skill. Similarly, things like grounding and mindfulness, again, they will kind of help to bring your child back into the here and now rather than being kind of very caught up in whatever it is that's going on in their mind. And of course, as we know with ADHDers, thoughts are going to be racing anyway, and then in a meltdown, things are going to be going even faster. It's going to be really difficult. So grounding and mindfulness can help to just bring someone back to the here and now. So I've got this image here of the 5 senses. So there's a nice exercise, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, that you might have come across. So it's kind of getting your child to think about 5 things they can see around them, 4 things that they can hear, 3 things they can touch, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing they can taste. And for that last one, maybe it might be that you have kind of some strong mints or something to hand that they can use, and that can be a really helpful grounding technique. Things like cold exposure as well work in a similar way. So it's a grounding technique. It's a way to kind of almost shock the senses back into the here and now. The brain can't possibly be kind of going over all of those thoughts or in the meltdown, the hyperarousal, because it needs to be present because something is kind of shocked. So things like splashing cold water in the face, holding ice packs, going outside if it's cold outside, those kind of things will help to bring someone back into their window of tolerance. Similarly, sometimes intense activity can be really helpful because it helps to expend any kind of excess feeling. Like I said, all that adrenaline is rushing through someone's body. In order to help kind of work through that adrenaline, to get that adrenaline gone, intense activity can be really helpful. So potentially, running up and down a hallway, or pedaling really fast on an exercise bike, or punching a pillow, something like that. As long as it's done in a helpful, controlled way, then that can be a really good way to help bring someone back into their window of tolerance. And the last one that I've put here is singing, and this one has to be approached carefully, of course, because if someone's not in the right headspace or the right mindset to be encouraged to sing, then they might find that really, difficult, patronizing, invalidating. So it has to be approached in a careful way, but it's a really nice one because it can really help. for a few reasons. So singing can help to just kind of lighten the mood, lighten what's going on. It can help bring someone back to the present. It can help engage someone with someone else. But also singing is thought to activate our vagus nerve as well, which is one of the nerves that helps to kind of bring us back down into the window of tolerance. This is because the vocal cords are next to the vagus nerve. So kind of the vibration of the vocal cords will help to stimulate that vagus nerve and then bring someone back down into their window of tolerance. So as I said, it's one to bear in mind and to use as and when it might be fit, but one to use carefully. And of course, it's really important to note that any of these strategies or any other strategies that you might be using is really, really helpful to practice prior to a meltdown. So getting these skills and strategies in place so someone's familiar with them rather than trying to pull them out and use them when actually someone's already in that meltdown state or that hyperarousal state, because it's going to be really difficult for them to engage with it, recognize it, practice it, and do it well if they're already in a state of hyperarousal. So practicing these things when someone's not so, when someone's in their window of tolerance is really helpful. And thinking about hypoarousal and shutdowns, what to do for these, you'll be pleased to know that the strategies are actually very similar to help bring someone back up into their window of tolerance if they're in shutdown. The only additional thing that I've added here is kind of that sensory stimulation. So to try and pick someone back up again. So similar to like the grounding and the mindfulness, but to do something that might help to boost that. If someone's kind of had a dip, then they need something to bring them up again. So it might be that they have kind of really loud music, or it might be that they have a fidget toy or something, a bit like the cold exposure. That's kind of the touch sensory that's stimulating. So different ways that you might stimulate the senses. Like I said, strong mints, sour sweets, those kinds of things that might help to bring someone back up into their window of tolerance. And then what to do kind of post meltdown or shutdown, what to do afterwards. So try, if you can, to talk with your child about what happened, talk it through in a non-challenging way. You know, they're not in trouble. You don't want to tell them off for having had this, because we're understanding behaviour as a communication of their emotions, of their needs. So what was it that was going on? Help me to understand this a bit more. I'm on your side. I want to know. And identify triggers with them. So trying to figure out, like I said, what was it that moved them out of the window of tolerance, and identify fast and slow triggers. So fast triggers would be the ones that happened kind of immediately before the meltdown or the shutdown, and slow triggers would be things that were building maybe throughout the day or throughout the week, things that are kind of there rumbling in the background. And then thinking about, is there any way that you can remove those triggers? Is there any way that those triggers can be reduced? And if possible, then that's a good quick win for next time. Ask what would help or what did help. So was there anything that, you know, as a parent, you might say, is there anything that I did this time that helped? Is there anything that you think next time would help? You know, trying to get a bit of a sense of what they want and getting them involved with that so that they feel that they've got some control over what might help. And do this, you know, you can draw, you can write, you can get creative, again, so it's non-threatening, so it feels like you're working together as a team. So that they, you know, they feel like they're involved in it as well. It's not just kind of parents saying, don't have meltdowns and shutdowns. It's this thing of actually, it's all about emotion regulation and us kind of working together on this. And talk about next time, as I said, you know, we all have emotions. We're all going to be dysregulated at times. So it will happen again, and that's fine. But what's going to happen next time? What would we like to do? What would be best? What do we think? And think about that with your child so they feel involved. So now moving on to think a little bit more about the mental health side of things, and first of all thinking about anxiety. So anxiety, I suppose, like I kind of mentioned earlier, tends to make us want to avoid things. As I said, anxiety is not a bad emotion. All emotions are functional. It's just about kind of when anxiety maybe gets to the point where it's not helping someone, it's making them avoid doing the things that they really do want to do, or the things they really do care about. So, of course, anxiety is there, like I said, to keep us safe in a general sense. It's warning us that something might happen that might make us feel unsafe. So, of course, it's absolutely fine to want to hide away sometimes. That's absolutely natural, and that's okay, and we have to do that sometimes for self-preservation. If we're always putting ourselves out of our comfort zone, then that's going to feel dysregulating and exhausting after time as well. But it's important just to know, like I said, that if that goes too far and it's actually starting to impact someone the other way, where they start to feel that their self-esteem has dipped, or they're becoming low in mood because they're always avoiding things that actually really are important to them, then that's when you maybe want to start trying to change things or think about things. And as I've said there, our response to anxiety is the key bit. So it's okay to feel anxiety, it's just how we respond to it, what we do with it, that's the bit that's important. So it's really important to find that balance. Sometimes we might want to hide away, sometimes your child might find it too difficult to attend school that day, for example, because the anxiety has been building for a long time, there's something in particular, and sometimes that is okay. Sometimes, you know, people need that downtime, that break. But if that's happening consistently over a long time, of course, that's going to impact in other ways. So it's finding that balance between avoiding sometimes for self-preservation, but not always doing that so it doesn't impact in other areas of life. So thinking about what can be done to keep safe in that moment. If someone is feeling anxious, if your child is feeling anxious about something, what can they do to help them to feel safe in the moment? What can be done kind of in the long term, help them to build up to that thing causing anxiety in a more manageable way. But look out for vicious flowers when they do that. So I'll talk about these things now. So you might have come across this kind of idea of vicious flowers before, this model of anxiety. If you haven't, I'll explain it a little bit now. So essentially, it's this idea that if a child is feeling anxious, or if anyone is feeling anxious, we will always try and do things to avoid the anxiety. And in the short term, that might feel good, and it does help to avoid the anxiety and reduce the anxiety. But in the long term, what it does, unfortunately, is feeds back into that anxiety. So I've used the example of kind of school avoidance here to help bring that to life. So if your child is kind of consistently going home from school early because they're feeling anxious, of course, in the short term, that helps them to feel like they can avoid the anxiety, like they can manage that a bit better. But in the long term, that feeds back into the anxiety because it doesn't provide them with the opportunity to learn that actually, if they had stayed the whole day, that's okay, they can cope with that they can build their confidence with that. So that can kind of be one of those petals on this vicious flower. Similarly, looking out for other people's reactions. So this is partly what I was talking about earlier about that rejection sensitivity as well. So if someone's anxious, they might think, okay, if I look out for everyone else's reactions, then I can make sure that I can manage those, that I can kind of respond to whatever's going on as best I can. And so that might help them to feel like they're kind of in control of the anxiety. But actually that can contribute to anxiety in the long run because they're feeling more hypervigilant, more hyper alert of what's going on, and they can start to interpret things maybe not as other people intended, those kind of things that can feed back into the anxiety. Excessive reassurance seeking, of course, we all want to do this when we're feeling anxious. It's fine to have some reassurance, but when it's done excessively, again, it doesn't prove to the child that they can manage, that they can cope, that they can solve some problems on their own. So excessive reassurance seeking can be one of those petals as well. Relying on certain people to be there, again, not building that confidence, that independence in themselves, and avoiding certain subjects or people, again, similar to sort of avoidance generally. So as I said, what can be done to help keep safe in the moment? So in the moment anxiety management. So I might sound like a broken record here, but of course, breathing exercises is really important. As I said, the real physical response that breathing exercises sends messages and signals to the brain to let the brain know that there's no immediate threat, there's no immediate danger, and therefore someone can be calmer, come back into their window of tolerance and deal with whatever it is in kind of a rational, logical way. Think about that vicious flower. What can I do? What might be the best outcome? Similarly, again, grounding exercises, helping someone to just bring them back into the here and now so they're not so caught up with that feeling of anxiety and the thoughts that anxiety bring as well. Like I said, with an ADHD, thoughts are going to be going a lot faster. There's going to be lots of different things happening in their minds. So grounding exercises can help bring them back to the here and now. Putting in any scaffolding and adjustments as well. So if there are particular things, again, I'll go back to the school example, if there's particular things at school that's making your child anxious, are there any kind of easy, quick wins, some scaffolding, some adjustments that can be put in place? Things like if they find it really difficult when it's really busy first thing in the morning and everyone's going to their lessons and they don't really know what to do, could it be a case of them being allowed to go in kind of 10 minutes earlier than everyone else or 10 minutes later than everyone else? Just really simple things that might help to manage that anxiety that are not going to have a really negative long-term impact and actually just help someone in the moment. And then identifying unhelpful thinking styles as well. So I've got here kind of some examples of some unhelpful thinking styles. So if you recognise that your child is kind of talking in a certain way, or they're expressing the anxiety, the worries that they're having in some of these ways, then these can be gently challenged as well. So identifying them and then challenging them. So if, for example, you've got this black and white sense of thinking, you know, other people always think I'm whatever it is, something bad. Other people always say this about me. And so it's very black and white, helping them to identify kind of that grey area as well, and thinking, you know, maybe gently questioning them. Oh, is that the case? Because so-and-so said that about you last week, or what about when that happened? Or, you know, just trying to get them to think about when those things, it might not be as polarized as it's either this or it's this, or things like, I always fail, or I'm always late, or, you know, whatever it is. Shoulds and musts as well, kind of, are they putting out unrealistic expectations on themselves, helping to get them to have a more realistic expectation of what is going to happen or what might be expected of them, those kinds of things. So lots of different things. Of course, if you look into unhelpful thinking styles, you'll be able to see some of these different ones, and it might be helpful to share this with your child as well, so that they can help to identify these as well. I'm thinking about long-term anxiety management. So being able to talk to a safe person about what it is that they're feeling anxious about. So whether that's someone at school, whether it's you, whether it's a friend, a family member, someone who they feel they're able to be open and honest with about what it is they're feeling, and someone who might be able to kind of do some of that unhelpful challenging of the unhelpful thinking styles. As I talked about in the first session, dropping the mask as well. So feeling like they're more able to be themselves, their authentic selves, and feeling confident with that. And of course, as I talked about in session one, this is a lot easier said than done, and there's lots of strategies and things that will build up to this in itself. But generally, if a child is more able to feel like they can drop that mask, then this will help with that long-term anxiety management, stopping them to kind of post-mortem conversations after they've happened, or things that have happened in the day. Journaling or worry diaries or worry jars or eaters. So that's what this thing is in the corner here. This is just a worry eater. So having that opportunity to kind of externalize worries and things. Again, the ADHD mind is very busy. Sometimes just being able to write things down helps to externalize the worry that's going on for someone. It helps them to go, right, that's kind of dealt with now, that's down on paper, I don't have to hold it in my mind so much. And it helps to kind of process some of those worries as well. And also sometimes there's this sense that if someone's really worried about something, they can't quite often put their finger on what it is, and when they write it down, they come to realize actually there's not as many things as I have had the sense that I was worried about. And so it helps in that way as well. Building confidence gradually through something called like exposure, like I said, building up to something that's making them feel anxious slowly, so that over time confidence is built. So again, I'll use the school example. If your child needs you to take them into school every day and they're not able to independently get there or get the bus or whatever it is, then you might agree with them kind of like an exposure sort of schedule, if you like. So you might say to them, for this week, I'll drive you into school as I normally do. Next week, what do you reckon? Could I maybe drive you in and drop you at the door rather than having to go in with you? And they might say, yeah, maybe I can do that. And then after that, if they're happy doing that and they're confident, okay, next time I'll drive you and I won't drive you quite up to school, and so forth, you know. So you gradually build that confidence rather than dropping them in at the deep end and them having to deal with something quite suddenly. Practicing self-care, so looking after themselves, being more compassionate to themselves, knowing when it is that they need to just kind of take that break, take some time out for themselves, doing the things that make them feel good, make them feel confident. Things like self-help books as well. I think I've got some resources at the end of these slides, things that can be helpful for children and teenagers. Therapy as well. So of course, if someone's really struggling with anxiety, there's absolutely no harm whatsoever in looking into getting some therapy for your child as well. Similarly, medication, if all other things are not really helping and are not working, it might, and anxiety is having a real impact on your child, then it might be that medication is really a useful option for them. Of course, it's important just to note that if they are on any other kinds of medication or medication for their ADHD, to just be aware of any kind of interactions and things that might be happening if you go to have a conversation about getting a prescription for some anxiety medication. And now thinking about low mood. So low mood can often happen in ADHD, as I've said, because people might feel like they are out of control. Other people don't really understand what it is that they're going through. The demands of life as a child and as a teenager is really high. You know, you're trying to establish yourself and your identity, your social circle. You're trying to do well academically. There's lots of things that can impact on someone's mood if they have ADHD. So what can be done? So again, thinking about triggers, so they're fast and slow triggers. Are there things that have built over a long time that are contributing to your child's low mood, or are there things kind of something that's happened, some sort of event that's actually made them feel really low? And then again, is there anything that can be done to counter those triggers or to reduce those triggers happening again in the future? Gently challenging any unhelpful thinking styles. Again, the ones that I showed just a few slides ago, they can also influence someone's mood in terms of those should, must, jumping to conclusions, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, those kinds of things. Increasing dopamine levels as well. So in session 1, of course, I talked about how in ADHD, dopamine is one of the hormones or the neurotransmitters which is lower than it would be in neurotypicals. And dopamine is also one of these hormones that is involved in our mood and our general well-being. So it's understandable then maybe that those with ADHD might struggle with their mood a little bit more because their dopamine levels are already at a lower level than a neurotypical might be. So increasing dopamine levels by doing things that make them feel good, that boost that sense of confidence, that they're doing something they're enjoying, that they're getting something positive out of. So kind of doing activities, things that they're kind of skillful at, things that you know they enjoy or that they're good at, to help increase those dopamine levels. And behavioural activation as well. So this is a really key technique in cognitive behavioural therapy. So this idea of when we're low in mood, we tend to want to do less, but when we do less, it makes us more low in mood, and it creates this kind of vicious cycle that you can see there. Behavioural activation is this idea of thinking like, what is something really small that your child can do that will help to just get them doing something. And research shows that once they just do one small thing, then that motivation does come, that increase in dopamine comes, they feel more confident, they feel more positive, and then there's like a positive cycle of kind of doing more, feeling better. And what can be done kind of more long-term as well. So things like boosting self-esteem, as we talked about in week 1, kind of being more compassionate to themselves, positive reinforcement as well. If they've done something that you felt was positive or that they enjoyed, kind of reinforcing that was a good thing. Look at the ACEs. This is an acronym for things that they can achieve. So getting that sense of achievement, that dopamine, connecting, whether that's with others, like people, whether that's with pets, whether it's with something that they enjoy, and again, of course, enjoyment, getting something out of it. And this is part of that behavioural activation as well. It's kind of doing things to make themselves feel better. Similarly, there's this 5 ways to well-being, similar sort of concept. So this is kind of connecting, being active, taking notice, i.e. kind of that mindfulness, that grounding, keeping learning, and giving as well. So having that sense of kind of fulfillment through this. Improving sleep and sticking to a healthy diet, of course, can help with low mood. Again, easier said than done. We know that this isn't always easy in ADHD, but sometimes if sleep can be helped, then mood will be increased as well. But it can work both ways. So sometimes if mood is helped, then sleep will be improved as well. Again, therapy, of course, if it's necessary, there's absolutely no shame in seeking some support kind of more formally. and medication as well. And as I said, just to note any kind of interactions or things that might occur if your child's already taking medication or is thinking about having ADHD medication. As I mentioned right at the start, just a brief trigger warning, I will talk just for one slide about self-harm. So just to know that I'll probably talk about this for a couple of minutes and then I'll be on to the next slide if you want to just opt out for a few minutes. So of course, as I said, unfortunately, self-harm is a strategy that we know lots of people will go to when they're feeling low in mood, when they're feeling anxious, particularly when people are in that hypo-arousal or that shutdown, because it maybe sometimes helps people to feel things, it helps them to feel like they can connect with their body again. So there's lots of different reasons why someone might harm themselves. And unfortunately, we know that lots of young people and lots of neurodivergent young people will self-harm, but unfortunately, it's not a good long-term strategy to use to help manage mood and feelings. So we want to try and move away from it as best as possible. So what to do if you learn that your child is self-harming or has self-harmed. So of course, help them to clean up, but sometimes it can be really useful to get them to clean up as best they can. So if this is kind of cuts or burns or whatever it is that they need to do, get them to kind of care for themselves afterwards to help clean up that harm as well. This is so that there isn't kind of this inadvertent idea that when they harm themselves, they get some kind of a positive response from you. And I'm not saying that anybody does this intentionally, but sometimes it can, like I said, inadvertently reinforce that for a child, when I harm myself, my parent is very attentive and very caring. And actually also if a child will sort of be able to clean up for themselves, it helps to increase that sense of kind of looking out for themselves, being more independent, being more confident that they can deal with this. Talk to them about it non-judgmentally, of course. Why is it this has happened? What happened leading up to it? What meant that you felt you needed to do this? Trying to find out what it provides for them. So as I said, some people will do it as a way to kind of connect back with their body. There will be lots of different reasons why a child or why a person might harm themselves. So it's about learning what it is that it brings for your child so that you know what might help to put in place so that they don't feel that they have to do that again. Learning what it is that drives it will help that prior bit better. So if you don't necessarily know, then you might just be kind of throwing strategies and hoping they stick, where actually knowing exactly what it is can help more so. And of course, limiting access, if it's things like, harming themselves, cutting themselves, being able to reduce things like razors and knives and sharps and that kind of thing, as best you can, limiting access so that they're not kind of, if they're feeling if they're out of their window of tolerance, like I said, the thinking brain switches off, it can be easier to kind of reach for something to harm themselves if it's there. So limiting access as best you can. And some of the strategies as well that might be helpful. So like I said, identifying emotions, recognizing those, knowing how to respond to these rather than reacting to them. So kind of all of those emotion regulation techniques that we already talked about in terms of the breathing, the grounding, those kinds of things. And also certain skills like TIP and STOP. So these are acronyms you might have come across before. So TIP, it stands for, the T stands for temperature. So changing the temperature, like I said, maybe splashing the cold water. I is intense exercise. So kind of burning off some of that adrenaline, getting rid of that sense of kind of needing to do something. If self-harm is kind of that, is being driven, intense exercise can help. Paced breathing, as I said, kind of controlling the breathing, and then paired muscle relaxation. So this means kind of when someone breathes in, they sort of tense up, and when they breathe out, they release that tension. So just a quick and easy exercise that someone can do. They don't need anything with them. They can just do this if they're feeling like they're gonna like they want to harm themselves. Similarly, STOP, so the S stands for stop everything, as in completely freeze, don't move a muscle. T is take a breath. O is observe, be mindful of what's going on around you, what's going on internally as well. P is practice what works, and the final P is proceed mindfully. So thinking about how do I want to respond in this situation rather than react. So these are some potentially helpful skills that you can practice with your child, like I said, when they're in their window of tolerance, so that when they're out of their window of tolerance, it's almost like second nature. Thinking finally about school avoidance and refusal, because this is something that parents have said is quite common in their children with ADHD, or just neurodivergent children generally can struggle with school avoidance or refusal. So figuring out why it is, like I said, knowing the underlying reason for school avoidance will help to put the strategies in place and prevent this from being an ongoing issue. So is it anxiety? And if it is, get specific. So what is it? Is it that it's academic worries? Is it that there's something sensory going on? Is it too loud? Is it too distracting? Is there something else going on? Is it because of the executive functioning difficulties? So that kind of demand of school and needing to have lots of deadlines, be very organised. Is it that's causing anxiety? Is it understimulation or boredom? Is it that they're just feeling they're not getting what they want to out of school? Is it something to do with self-esteem? And I suppose with any of these reasons, depending on what it is, you will then think about things that you can put in place or things that other people can do, different strategies that might be helpful to reduce that anxiety and to help them to feel able and more confident to attend school. I just have this link here at the bottom of the slide to a blog post of an adult who has ADHD, and that's where this image comes from as well, from this blog post, because it's an adult with ADHD who's talking about her experience of when she was at school and some of the things that she came across and some of the reasons why school was really difficult. And so I just popped that in there because I thought it might resonate with people, it might ring true for a lot of the children, your children. So yeah, it might just be something to help validate and also think about, you know, ways forward, things that might be helpful. So I talked about identifying why there is school avoidance, but how do you know, or how do you know what's going on in the day? Because I know that often, you know, you'll say to your child, how was your day? And they might say, don't know, or it was all right, or they might not say anything at all. So get specific, ask specific questions to try and bring this out of them. So peaks and pits is a nice one. At the end of the day, asking them, you know, what was the peak of the day, i.e. what was the highlight, what was the pit of the day, what was the kind of worst thing, so that they can think about them for themselves, and then again kind of notice and label that and recognize it for themselves, and then they might be able to recognize triggers as well, and then the peaks might help them to identify kind of strengths and positives and things that can be built upon and reinforced. Questions like, who did you spend lunchtime with? What lessons did you have? What made you angry today? And then there's this idea from solution focused therapy. So it's a form of therapy. And it's this question, you know, if one thing were different tomorrow that would make you feel a lot better, or that would make things feel more positive, what would that be? If one small thing were different. And this can give you real insight into what the problem is initially, what's going on for your child, but it also might give you a really realistic idea of something that could be different and that could change. So this is a really nice question, like I said, from solution focused therapy, that might give you a bit more insight and clues. Speak with the school, of course. You probably will have been doing this already if this is an ongoing issue for your child, but of course, speak with the school. What are they doing already? And is it working? And if it's not, why not? What's going on for the child? Again, get specific. Why is it not particularly working for your child? Involve your child in these conversations as well. Is there anything that school can do more of, or can they do things differently? Are there any quick wins? Is there anything easy that can be done? Of course, if you need to get Senko involved, pastoral support, head of year, trusted teachers that your child knows, kind of get them, or they feel much more confident around, because that will help. And then SENDIAS as well. So if you're based in Norfolk and Waveney, then SENDIAS is this local service who's able to offer kind of advice and guidance on what things can be put in place at school, or what adjustments can be made in order to help support your neurodivergent child. And finally, the last slide is just some helpful links and resources for supporting your child's mental health. So as I said, kind of different blogs and things, different websites or apps and things that might help your child. Yeah, different things to do if your child's in crisis, those kind of things. That's the end of all of the slides for today's session. I hope it was useful. I hope there were some things in there that might be helpful for you and your child. And I'll see you again for the next session, which is all about medication and executive functioning.